Keep your eye on the gray Focus. The problem solvers are in pursuit, and the driver seems desperate to get away.
Ran it red, didn't stop.
We just want to ask her some questions. She's been going in circles trying to shake us, even trying to sneak through an alley.
She's right there.
Wait till you find out who's behind the wheel and why we're on her tail. Things are about to come to a head. She spots a police officer and runs to him for help. But wait a minute. She is the police, and she's in uniform. What's she afraid of? She complains to the officer that someone's been following her, but he doesn't seem to care.
Let's get out.
We jump out with the camera rolling, hoping to finally ask her some questions.
I need to ask you about that Focus.
Follow me, you're insane.
Call me crazy, but there are some real issues with that car. And she's not the only Detroit cop I have questions for.
Box two. Hey, I want to ask you about this Ford Focus that was supposed to be auctioned off.
Here we go again, another cop trying to give me the slip. He's knee-deep in this thing. Then there's this guy, Gasper Fiore. You might recognize him. He's become a frequent flyer on the Problem Solvers. He dominates the police towing business, and he's known for his cozy relations with the police. His company, B&G Towing, sold that Focus to the Detroit cop. Why is that a problem? Let me give you some background, and you'll understand why this thing stinks to high heaven.
Got 900. 900 going once, going twice, sold for 900.
You might not know it, but Detroit police are big into the used car business. They impound hundreds of cars a year. Every car that doesn't get redeemed by its owner winds up being sold at auction by the police. The bulk of the money goes to the city, and most of the auctions are held at towing companies where the cars are impounded. Cars that nobody bids on, usually the real junkers, are signed over to the towing companies to pay off towing and storage fees. These auctions are open to the public, and everybody is supposed to get a fair shot. But I've been getting complaints about police auctions for years. It's almost always the same complaint. Auction regulars say at some of these auctions, the best cars don't make it to the auction block. The suspicion is that some of the good cars wind up being sold in backdoor deals to people with connections. And that brings me back to the Ford Focus, a car that was stolen, recovered by police, impounded at Fiore's tow yard, and sold to Officer Audrey Curtis. I'll show you how the deal went down, and you can decide whether this was one of those backdoor deals. Before you make up your mind, you have to hear who recovered the Focus after it was stolen. I'm saving the best for last. It all begins with this ad in the Detroit Legal News. By law, the city has to advertise every car going up for auction with its vehicle identification number. That's the Ford Focus right there. It was supposed to be sold at auction by police at Fiore's tow yard on May 20th. But I discovered it didn't go down that way. I was told the car was never put up for auction. I tracked down two people who went to that May 20th auction. Both were interested in the Focus. Both said the car was never put up for public sale that day. A few weeks later, I got a hit at the Secretary of State. It turns out B&G Towing had signed over the Focus to Audrey Curtis, police officer Audrey Curtis. And the official paperwork seems to support what the tipster had told me. Records show the auction officer, Alonzo Jones, turned the car over to Fiore's B&G Towing on the day of the auction to cover towing and storage fees. That's only supposed to happen when nobody bid on the car. 33 days later, on June 22nd, B&G sold the Focus to Audrey Curtis. Gasper Fiore signed off as the seller. The car had less than 19,000 miles on it. The price? $3,000. It looks pretty fishy, and the cop in charge of the auction is clamming up.
So you can't explain why something that should have been sold to the public was instead sold to a police officer?
Gasper Fiore's lawyer says there was no backdoor deal for the cop and that Fiore doesn't control the auction process, Officer Jones does. Yet he insists the car was put up for auction and nobody bid on it. At that point, he says, it was properly signed over to Fiore and he was free to sell it to whoever he wanted. And what does Audrey Curtis have to say? Before I confronted her, I wanted to confirm she was a Detroit cop and get pictures of her on the job. And that's where I ran into some unexpected problems. I couldn't catch her at work. She never seemed to be at the station, and we never heard her on the police radio. After a couple of weeks of detective work, we figured out why. Curtis is a community relations officer. She doesn't do typical police work, and she seems to come and go as she pleases. While we were watching, she didn't even report to the police station. Check this out. She had a police car stashed at the Chrysler Jefferson Avenue plant, picked it up at the beginning of her shift, dropped it off at the end. And she wasn't exactly killing herself. On July 30th, she picked up the police car at 12:20 p.m. and dropped it off at 4:57. On July 31st, she picked up the cruiser at 11:55 a.m. and dropped it off at 4:33 p.m. She put in less than 5 hours 2 days in a row, even though she was scheduled to work 8. And there was the time she spent shopping for clothes at Dots. How's that for community relations? Once we got her routine down, I figured the Chrysler plant was the best place to catch up with her. So we followed her into the parking lot. Check this out. As soon as she spotted me, she drove off, leaving the police car sitting there. We tailed her for 10 minutes, and this is the closest I got.
I need to ask you about that focus.
If Officer Curtis did get a favor, and if Fiore's towing company had anything to do with it, it's an obvious conflict of interest. B&G Towing has a contract in Curtis's police district. Part of her job in community relations is to recover stolen cars. Police and towing sources say she has the ability to steer Fiore business. Fiore's attorney disagrees with that. And now let me give you the kicker. Guess who recovered that Ford Focus after it was stolen? It was Audrey's husband, Philip. Detroit police officer Philip Curtis.